Hello listeners, if you've tuned into this podcast and listening for the first time, you're actually tuned into part 3. So do yourself a favour and quickly go back to part 1 and listen all the way through so you follow the journey of how we got here. This week during a production meeting, Matt Hubbard, the president of the Defenders of Australia Club, informed me that the podcast was kicking goals with listeners tuning in from all over Australia as well as some from overseas. And for this reason, he asked if we could perhaps find a theme song that we could use at the start of every episode that listeners could identify with as our very own theme, much like branding a product. I completely agreed, but I informed him that there would be the little question of copyright and, most importantly, copyright fees that would be involved. So at this moment, I didn't think that we were in a position to spend any money, as it's money that we don't have to spend. But Matt, who's always ready to jump in with a workable solution, informed me that he did in fact have an answer. It turns out that Matt is an accomplished tin flute player who has performed live with a Queensland-based orchestra, and that we would be welcome to use one of his masterpieces. Wow, Matt, I had no idea. So let's start this episode with our new Land Rover's Diary theme and continue with our 3 years full-time travel around Australia in a Land Rover.
It's about a journey and not the destination. It's about an adventure and all that nature has to offer. It's about one life and living it. This is the Land Rover Diaries.
All right, enough messing about. Let's start the episode. So when I was planning to develop this podcast, I wanted my objectives clear in my mind so my podcast could have a coherent storyline that was both entertaining and engaging. I wanted at its core to be about two things. Number one, the amazing experience of travelling around our country and seeing and doing the most memorable things, but at minimal cost, so people can afford to have the same experience if they decide that this could be the next part and the next chapter of their lives. So my story would focus on the world of house sitting and the endless opportunities that that lifestyle can offer. The second objective was to share what it was like to do all these remarkable things behind the wheel of a 30-year-old Land Rover Defender. Add a little history and fun facts and letters from the listeners, and bingo, the birth of a multi-part series is now in full swing. We left off last time with our stay in Marburg, Queensland. Our first house stay had ended perfectly, and it was a sad day when we had to say goodbye to the little town and the beautiful home in the hills and the pets. That final morning before we drove out, Kylie cleaned up the house top to bottom while I got busy cleaning up from the mowing that I'd done the day before. By 10 a.m, the house looked perfect inside and out, and Kylie handed me a large bag full of cleaning products that we'd bought to leave our house days spotless without using the homeowner's products. I took the bag from her hand and climbed up the new ladder that I'd built for my car to place the items in that old rooftop storage box, when she told me that putting things up there would actually be a hassle, so could I perhaps store them somewhere else? No problem, I said, and I went over to my driver's seat, lifted it and showed her that there was an empty compartment waiting right there to be used. I had no idea that was there, she said. That's very clever. That certainly is. And there's one on your side, except your side has got batteries in it. Why isn't the car battery under the bonnet like other cars, she fired back. I looked at her and said, because, well, you know what? That's actually a really good question, I mumbled. In truth, I had no answer, but I was sure that there would be a perfectly sound reason once I had time to research it. I would have a worthy explanation for her. That's it, house sit 1 complete, and with that we climbed into the busted ass Land Rover and started her up and sang to the music like school kids on a bus forced by their teacher to sing the same old tired song on our way to some school excursion. We had 3 days to fill now before our next house sit that would find us in a beautiful 2-bedroom heritage listed old stone cottage that overlooks Sydney Harbour from our patio. 3 days to cover 1,000 kilometres down to what promised to be a spectacular house sit. Covering just 350 kilometres that first day, we stopped and made coffee, ate snacks and followed the coast down. It was in this second part of our adventure that my wife, sitting in the passenger seat, made an observation. She reached down to the side of her seat in hopes of reclining it back so she could perhaps have a little snooze, when she came to realise that for some reason, unlike her little Suzuki Swift back home, the seat in the Land Rover Defender hardly reclined. In her little car, she can lay right back and get hours of sleep. How come this seat doesn't recline very far? I mean, it's a good point, a valid question. Once again, it was something that I needed to look into. Perhaps her seat was damaged. Perhaps it's part of a bigger design that I know little about. Regardless, she sat upright for the rest of the trip, and together we enjoyed the beautiful views as we made our way down to a little place called Maxwell, inland from Nambucca Heads, New South Wales. That night we were having a farm stay at the home of a family member. Although we were offered a beautiful bedroom inside the house, it was Kylie who said no. We're looking forward to staying in our rooftop tent. However, it was soon brought to our attention that this part of the country gets really cold and they were expecting winds all night. All it meant for us was snuggling up closer and enjoying the change of environment. Now, we own one of those fancy all-electric Bunatop rooftop tents, all made from alloy, lined top to bottom with a stylish finish, complete with 2 electric fans to help you keep cool during the warmer nights. You just press a button and the whole thing goes up with the awnings that deploy, giving you weather protection over the 4 windows. Setting up your rooftop tent has never been easier. I won't lie, Kylie and I struggled that night with the chill that just seemed to get colder and colder. The thought that we were heading more and more south into winter meant we had to address this problem or we'd be unable to sleep. That's why the next morning we went into the little town and parked up at the one and only op shop in Maxwell. We were looking for warm, thick blankets to really keep us warm when I spotted one of those small electric heaters. When I say small, think no bigger than a toaster in your kitchen. You simply plug it into mains and use one of the 3 settings and it blows warm air into a small bedroom, making it more than comfortable to sleep in. It was perfect. $5 later, I climbed up that ladder I'd installed days earlier and put it into that old storage box. I looked down at Kylie, who was watching me. She rolled her eyes at that arrogant look on my face as I looked at her, then looked at the ladder, and then looked at her, and then looked back at the ladder with that smirk worthy of a politician. I'm happy to report that we never endured another cold night from that moment on. In weeks and months to follow, our rooftop tent would go from chilly nights all the way to full-blown snow at the top of the Great Lakes of Tasmania. But that's later in the series. Sydney, Australia is by far one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I've always loved the rich history of this area as I connect so well with anything historic about Australia and its colonial era. The day we rolled into Sydney was actually the first time I had driven there. I'd been in Sydney many times before, but I'd never been behind the wheel. And for a boy raised in Darwin, where 4 cars on the road in front of you is considered peak hour traffic, this experience was something else. But I had a secret weapon, a massive Land Rover Defender that was scaring every other motorist around me for miles. And why? Because I had Queensland plates, and I think New South Wales people consider Queensland drivers as not being very good. That afternoon we arrived and met the couple who owned the little stone cottage. He was a surgeon who specialised in facial reconstruction surgery for motor vehicle accident victims. His wife worked at home and both were collectors of the most unique art from the Byzantine era. What a beautiful home. It turns out that this little cottage was heritage listed, as I mentioned before. But why, I hear you ask? And for that, it's this episode's time for our history lesson as we go back in time.
Saddle up, for the morn is here.
It was early one cold morning in 1899 when the last of 1,000 young men left the iconic Sydney pub known as the Fortune of War and boarded the SS Medic. Their destination was Cape Town, South Africa. The Boer War was kicking off and Australia was quick to send its finest to support the motherland and her interests in Africa. As the last of the troops finished up their drinks and hurried on board, a Navy warrant officer based in Circular Quay was charged with the duty of seeing that the last of the men was safe on the ship. The last of the troops, who hurried to buy one final drink, did something curious. They paid for 2 beers, however, the barman only poured them one. The other beer would be waiting for them on their return. It was an understood and unspoken tradition that at the end of the war, for every Australian soldier who failed to return, his mates would return to the Fortune of War and drink to his memory. And that one last beer, already paid for by their fallen comrade, would be poured and left on the counter, so the surviving members of his unit could feel his spirit with them on their return as they drank to his memory.
They remember me, they miss me, and they pray for me.
This little tradition would be passed on year after year with every deployment, engagement and wartime service the ADF would embark on to this very day. The Fortune of War is open and trading today, and if you ever want to have a drink in Sydney's oldest surviving pub that's open for business 7 days a week, then head to the Rocks and have a drink as you look around at the amazing photos hanging on the walls capturing the life and times of people way back when the pub was first opened to the public in 1828. The day the SS Medic left the shores of Sydney Harbour back in 1899, that old warrant officer watched the ship sail from his little stone cottage provided for him by the Australian government, or specifically the Colonial Architects Office of New South Wales. In decades to follow, the Australian Navy would take ownership of that little cottage, as well as many others in the area, and finally they were sold off to the public, where one day a facial reconstruction surgeon purchased this historic home and asked for house sitters to look after it for 3 weeks. That's where Kylie and I enter the story, when we parked our busted ass Land Rover behind the cottage and stepped out to meet the doctor and his wife. The doctor showed me around and pointed out where we could safely park our car as Kylie spoke to his wife and had a tour of the home and met their beautiful little poodle, Mr. Oscar. Within 2 hours, the good doctor and his wife left for the airport in a taxi, leaving Kylie and I at their home to enjoy the views and the location that was a once-in-a-lifetime experience within the walls of a home that could tell a story or two. As we settled in for the evening, I noticed some markings on the door jamb of the bathroom door. Now, you need to understand that this is a really, really old home, and it seems every window frame and door jamb has been painted and repainted and painted again, perhaps every 5 years since its construction. It seems the contractor who painted the surfaces didn't bother to sand back the old paint, or perhaps if he had done so, there'd be no timber left in the door jamb or window frame. At any rate, I walked past the door jamb and noticed under the paint small markings deep in the wood, covered by layers and layers of paint. It seems at some point a child must have spent part of their life growing up in this cottage. Perhaps the child of a serving defence member back in the 1940s or 50s. It's unknown, as I can't make out a clear set of numbers indicating the year of this record. What I can make out is the record of the child's height over a period that only the mother and father of the child would recall. When you live in a place like inner city Sydney, driving around in your own car is not advised. Our Land Rover had a rooftop tent, making it way too high for undercover car parks, and finding a free spot on the street was impossible. So for the next 3 weeks we would catch trains, buses or the odd ferry here and there as we took in the sights and the sounds of this world-class location. I would spend hours sitting outside on the patio watching the boats and the tourists move around, and at night I would try and count how many camera flashes I could see within 10 seconds of observing people across the water at the Opera House. I simply couldn't keep up. The nightlife in our little corner of the rocks was vibrant, with music always in the air, people walking back and forth and speaking in every kind of language. There was singing and laughter into the night, but once Kylie and I were indoors, it's like we were a whole other world away. We thought it couldn't get any better than this, but we were wrong, as more house sits would come our way that would give even this one a run for its money. 3 years on finds me and Kylie looking back at the photos we snapped of our many house sits, the pets, the homes, the locations, and we just can't get over how rewarding it all is. And that brings us to today's letter sent in from Adam. He asked me to give some details about where we get our house sits. Well mate, there's several places that you can register online to do house sitting, and some specialise in Australia, others focus on Europe and the US. Kylie and I use 2 online platforms, Aussie House Sitters and Mind a Home. There's a bunch of house sitting pages on Facebook, so look them up as well. The first time we went around Australia doing house sitting, we travelled for a year and a half. That's 18 months. The amount of time that we spent camping at a caravan park or maybe a night or 2 in a motel here and there was a total of 32 nights. 32 nights in a total of 547 nights. So why 32 nights camping or staying in motels? Simple. Sometimes, regardless how hard you try, you can't manage to end one house sit and move into the next one on the same day. At times, we need to occupy ourselves for as much as 5 days. That's 5 days to leave one location, such as a house sit in Geelong, to get to Mount Gambier for our next house sit, but the family living there isn't ready to leave yet. It's those gaps between house sits that added up to 32 nights in total over 18 months of house sitting, or 547 days in total. You show me a cheaper way to see Australia and I'll start doing it today. In our next episode, I'll bring you an interview with the same guy who asked today's question. He's the Defender of Australia Club treasurer, a lifelong fan of Land Rover and by far one of the most dedicated members, loyal all the way. I drove down to meet him for coffee and done an interview with him, and I'd like to present that to everyone as a small change of our regular format. Talking about Defenders of Australia Club, have you joined yet? It's just $30, come on. You spend more money on takeaway coffees a week. It's a terrific bunch of guys and girls who come together all over Australia every month for a coffee catch-up, or maybe go four-wheel driving on the weekend, or maybe even go camping as a group. It's a wonderful tribe who share a love for an awesome car. Defenders of Australia Club are online, so take a quick look and say hi. We'd love to meet you. That's it, it's time to call part 3 of the Land Rover Diaries a wrap. Do me a favour, will you? Press that like button and share the podcast so more people can enjoy it for a little bit of harmless fun. As always, a big thank you to Bill and Liz Martin for their inspiration and thoughtful edits and advice. You make my scrambled bunch of ideas on paper I call a story into something that's easy to follow and enjoy. Production made easy when you use the Martins. We'll close today's episode with another wonderful piece from Matt Hubbard and his Tin Flute of Fire. His live performances are on CD and now available in all good music shops.